Welcome to the Agriculture Review in AP Human Geography. Agriculture is a very important topic in the world, in in everything. It covers a lot of the first sector, a lot of the primary sector of the world. It's involved in all of the food that you eat. Agriculture is practiced for sustenance and for export around the world. And the main goal of agriculture is to feed everyone, because we're not hunter gatherers anymore. We want to feed everyone. So I will be covering pretty much everything that you need to know about agriculture. Most of the things that will be covered in the exam about agriculture, and everything in my book about agriculture. So let's go. It's going to be a really long video. Encourage you to take breaks in the middle of the video. And this is a really long video, so you have to actively learn. You have to, if you just watch the whole thing and then the next day for your exam, you're just going to forget everything. It doesn't work like that. You have to take notes or do something that will make you understand all this content. So, this is such a terrible slide. I just noticed. Okay, hunter-gathering. Hunter-gathering is the technique that people used before. The technique that people used before they do agriculture. So hunter-gatherers are people who collect food, live by hunting and fishing and picking fruits and nuts. And we still see hunter-gatherers today, like the people of North Sentinel Islands. There's this picture right here. The picture on the top is a picture of people in North Sentinel Island trying to fight off invaders, or European people, that is. And we can also have the African Bushmen of Namibia and Botswana, which are also hunter-gatherers, but hunter-gatherers aren't that prevalent anymore. Most people practice agriculture now, or are involved in other sectors. The crop is any type of seed that's cultivated by someone. And in agriculture, we cultivate crops. We modify the Earth's landscape by cultivating crops and animals to obtain subsistence, which is feeding oneself, and economic gain. And there's the qualities of hunter-gatherer. They travel in small groups, about 50 people, roughly 50 people, because a large group would exhaust the region's resources really quickly. They migrate frequently from places to places depending on the season, and they collect food daily. If they don't collect food daily, their food's going to spoil and they are going to die. First agricultural revolution. The first agricultural revolution was probably done, it involved the sowing of seeds. So people just threw seeds, and then they threw their food or something, and then plants start growing out of the food, and crops, like the product that they could grow out of the food, they were able to eat again. So people were like, let's plant more. So they keep planting more and more and more and more, and then we got agriculture. So the agricultural revolution was in line with the Stone Age, which is about 12,000 years ago, and subsequently, over time, people developed new farming methods in order to make the agricultural revolution, in order to get more from agriculture. People wanted to live a sedentary lifestyle, so people domesticated animals. They used manure from those animals to speed up the growing of crops, and they poured water over the crops in order to help the crops grow better. Because if it rains, and if it doesn't rain, the crops wouldn't grow. So they had to find some way to get water in order to grow the crops. So this was also quite a mistake, because in creating this agriculture, people started to have stuff to do, and because people started to have stuff to do, there was a social division, kind of. So I have the food, therefore I'm the king. And I can sow stuff, therefore I'm better than you. And then you're a peasant, you're working on the field, and I can grow crops and everything. I can make metal, which came later, and I own a bunch of soldiers, which is also which is a higher social status than being a farmer or a soldier. So the food surplus allowed people to do different jobs, which allowed for higher. Sorry about the coughing. Which allowed for a higher division in society. So people probably found two ways to do agriculture. The first way is called vegetative planting. Vegetative planting is you cut crops, you cut stems, you divide roots. So you cut the coriander in your field and it grows coriander back. That's vegetative planting. The reproduction of plants through cutting stems and dividing roots, it probably occurred simultaneously, but it probably didn't occur simultaneously, but it occurred in separate separate areas. So Southeast Asia, where the taro and yam was found in vegetative planting to be able to be vegetatively planted, and dog, pig, and chicken were domesticated. It's not a vegetative planting, but they were domesticated. So the palm tree and sweet potato in West Africa, manioc. The left picture is the manioc, and the right picture is the arrowroot. So manioc, sweet potato, and arrowroot. The herbs of seed agriculture. The seed agriculture is you take the actual seed in the agriculture, and this is the one that's practiced most today. You take the actual seed in the agriculture, and then you plant them in separate places. And this is you plant them in like separate holes, and then you wait for the tree to grow or the crop to grow. So in Western India, Northern China, Ethiopia, Southern Mexico, and Northern Peru, we got all sorts of crops like rice, cotton, millet, sorghum, maize, squash, more cotton, beans, and we got all different sorts of animals domesticated like cattle, sheep, goat, llama, alpaca, and turkey. So, the second agricultural revolution. What is the second agricultural revolution? Now, the first agricultural revolution is we are able to plant crops. The second agricultural revolution is we are able to plant crops so much faster. It's not even funny. The Industrial Revolution. What's the Industrial Revolution? First of all, it's the advancements of geometry, technology, and manufacturing that allowed mass production and convenience, which greatly increased the economies of the countries involved. So England had a textile agricultural revolution in the 18th century. It allowed so much money to be we have so much money. So I had 3 L's in this grammatically. Holy shit. The production of food increased as a result of this agricultural revolution because we were able to afford more machines like cotton gin and other machines like the Reaper, the McCormick Reaper, which did a lot of the agriculture, made agriculture a lot more efficient. Therefore, there's an economic increase and an increase in population. Therefore, we can feed more people now. The food is a major trade good, and the trading is being fueled faster also by the revolution. So boats were created, better boats, better train tracks are created in order to transport quicker. And because we can transport more, we get more money. Something that also helped with the second agricultural revolution was the enclosure movement. So small farms, people used to only have small farms, and they only had the money, they only had the amount of crops to feed themselves. Now we combine all the small farms into one big farm, specialize in 1 or 2 crops, and then we can have all the food to feed ourselves. With those machines, we can have a bigger surplus, therefore we can sell those foods, and we can also make a profit out of it. And the fact that we can make a profit out of it, we can afford healthcare for everyone. That's why there's a huge population boom in the Industrial Revolution. So Thomas Malthus was a geographer who thought we were all going to die because the world was going to explode in population. Which it did explode in population, but the food production also increased just the same. He thought food production increases arithmetically, which means 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, but population increases geometrically, which means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So he thought it was going to increase, population was increasing so much faster than food production. But that's not true because of the Third Agricultural Revolution. Third Agricultural Revolution is also called the Green Revolution. So in the Green Revolution, there was a seed called miracle wheat seed, and the miracle wheat seed responded better to fertilizer, it matured faster, and it was less sensitive to day length and other climate change. And Dr. Norman Borlaug won the Nobel Peace Prize for saving 1 to 2 billion lives with this wheat crop that fueled the Green Revolution. So and subsequently, people also discovered that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium were good fertilizers to plant our crops with, which also came with the Green Revolution. So today we use a lot of genetically modified seeds, genetically modified organisms, so GMO. GMO crops today are genetically modified. They can survive all year round. So you can see tomatoes the whole year in market. You can see watermelons the whole year in market. They seem to never spoil. It's because they can survive all year round, they can develop pesticide and insecticide resistance, and they can survive on poor quality soil. Now, some people call this a fourth agricultural revolution because more people are getting satiated by these types of ways of planting crops. However, there are also people who don't want this. There are also people who are pushing back the genetically modified organism movement, and they want to push back because the bacteria might become resistant to antibiotics. So whatever medicine that you're taking right now, if you're taking it and you're eating genetically modified food, the bacteria might become resistant because that genetically modified food has already come into your system. It might destroy ecosystems in agriculture that has stood long before the genetically modified organisms movement, and it's also a cultural kind of barrier. So if one group never vows to use pesticides or insecticides or chemicals in their foods and you're forcing it to them, that's kind of unethical. And GMO seeds are normally supplied by big businesses, so they're kind of relying on big businesses to supply with seeds and feed, and they don't want to do that because we don't want big businesses to have all the money, and big businesses usually treat the workers just as bad as they do treat the animals. So Europe and Africa, the relationship between Europe and Africa, GMO seeds in Europe, GMO foods in Europe has to be labeled, and there's a lot of inspection. There's a lot of strict guidelines with the GMO food. So the European market is one of the biggest buyers of Africa. So Africa does not like GMO crops because they don't want to have to go through all of the strict guidelines that Europe has in place for them. So what's the difference of farming between less developed countries, developing countries, and more developed countries, developed countries? So the main difference of farming between the core and periphery, or developing countries, is if the farmer is planting for food consumed on or off the farm. Yes, and that's one of the questions in the review. So in developing countries, they practice subsistence agriculture and one form of commercial agriculture, and they normally consume on the farm. That means they produce just enough food for them to eat, and they don't sell it off the farm. They do it by shifting cultivation, pastoral nomadism, intensive subsistence agriculture, wet rice dominant and not wet rice dominant, and plantation farming, and specialty crops. The more developed countries practice commercial agriculture. They practice mixed crop and livestock, dairying. I don't know why I put livestock twice. I think it's grazing. Grazing, grain farming, horticulture, and Mediterranean. So this is the list of all the regions where each farming is performed. I don't think it's that important. I think it's more well that you know what each type of agriculture is rather than where they are performed. But this is the list. So shifting cultivation is normally practiced in areas where it's humid, low latitude, or areas where there's a lot of forest. Pastoral nomadism is practiced in the dry lands. Wet rice dominant is practiced in the Southeast Asia, South Asia region, China, Japan, and Korea. The recessive. So it's not recessive. Wet rice not dominant is practiced in Northern Asia, the Middle East, South Mexico, and West South America. And the plantation farming is kind of sparse around the lower developed countries because not the lower developed countries, the developing countries. Now, mixed crop and livestock. All these types of mixed crop and livestock is normally practiced in areas where all these couldn't be practiced in. Horticulture is practiced in Mediterranean areas or Florida, because Florida is a very good supply of oranges because it's kind of a tropical climate. Dairy is normally practiced in places where the milk, close to urban areas because of the milk shed. Grain is practiced in areas where grain can be cultivated in the winter or spring wheat, so not too cold, not too hot. There's a winter wheat and a spring wheat area, which I'll talk about later. Ranching is practiced in normally places where crops couldn't grow, like Texas is pretty dry, and other dry lands like the Arizona, the area of the U.S., kind of western U.S. where the land isn't really wet, and the middle, like Central Asia, and Mediterranean is practiced around the Mediterranean, obviously, like very South Africa and in California and in Chile as well. What's shifting cultivation? Shifting cultivation is a type of agriculture where people clear land by burning the vegetation, and then they plant the crops into the land that has the burned vegetation, because the ash provides the nutrients for the land to stay healthy. And then once the land turns poor because of excessive farming, they go to a different place and wait until the area is kind of regrown back, and then they go back there and do it again. So they keep doing it. Now, people don't like shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation is not a preferable way of farming because the people can development can be financed in less developed countries by much better way, like cattle for commercial farming, logging. They can deforest. They can have deforestation. They can cut trees and sell logs for more money, and they can also plant cash crops like cotton, tobacco, and etc. So pastoral nomadism, whatever, is agriculture that involves herding and domesticating animals, and they herd all these types of animals. Even though they're herding these animals, they don't eat them unless if they have to. So they mostly eat grain. They trade the animal product with the people who grow grain, and sometimes they don't have those people. So women and children they have to practice to grow grain by themselves, and if all else fails, they can stay in one place where it's a little wet, and then they can grow the grains there. Once they have enough grain, or once the weather is dry, once the weather gets dry, they can go and domesticate and herd more crops, more animals. So 15 million people practice this type of agriculture. However, it is going on the decline because people would rather do livestock ranching, or people would rather do intensive subsistence agriculture because it produces more money. And the governments don't like this type of agriculture because they want the lands for themselves, and they don't want pastoral nomads to just come around and take land off of people, claim land as theirs. So what's intensive subsistence agriculture? Intensive means the land has to be worked on a lot in order to produce the most yield for one piece of land. Now, there's two types of subsistence agriculture. There's wet rice dominant and wet rice recessive. Wet rice not dominant. So the wet rice dominant is where the rice is planted, the rice seeds are nurtured in a nursery on dry land, and then they're moved to the flooded field. So the steps are buffalo or oxen plows the field, and then the land is flooded with water, and flooded water is called a sawa. I think that's important to know for the test. It's called a sawa. And the seeds that are grown in the nursery, they're planted in the flooded field, wait for a bit, and then wait for like a few months, and then they harvest by hand, and separate the husks of the rice, and the threshed, and then the light husk, the light chaff, which is what the husk is called, blown away by the wind, and it's called winnowed. If the rice is sold, it's whitened, it's ingrained. I don't know what it's called actually, but it's whitened to make it look nicer. It removes the hull of the rice, which takes some of the nutrients away, but we want to make it look nicer. If there's a warm winter, they might want to do it. Might want to do a double crop, which means they want to get 2 harvests in 1 year, which is obviously better. Like if you double crop, you have 2 times the harvest. You have a lot of surplus, and then you can export it to the other countries. Now, some regions you can't practice rice dominant. You have to practice wet rice not dominant because either the winters are too harsh, or the weather's too dry, or there's just not enough rice, or there's just not enough water in order to flood the field. So the wet rice not dominant uses crop rotation, which is you rotate crops from each field to decrease the risk of losing the soil nutrients, and practiced normally in northern China. I already told you, but many types of crops are grown, like millet, oats, corn, sorghum, soybeans, and cash crops are also grown, like cotton, flax, hemp, and tobacco. And these cash crops really help the cash crops really help the LDC develop in the world and make money. So the type of commercial LDCs also practice commercial agriculture, and the type of commercial agriculture they practice is called plantation farming. Now in the U.S., old U.S., slaves used to work on plantations. Now workers work on plantations, but they actually get money, unlike the slaves. So the plantations, it's a plot of land agriculture that specializes in 1 or 2 crops. So the crops that are normally grown are cotton, sugarcane, coffee, rubber, tobacco. They create a lot of money for the less developed countries. They create a lot of them. And plantations they're usually owned by more developed countries of North America and Europe, because because labor is cheap in these plantations, so we can have a lot of people working and they don't have to pay a lot of money for them, so we can have the products shipped back cheap. So the crops are processed before shipping, so the crop weight would be less. So once you ship back, the shipping price would be less. Now it's halfway through, and I suggest you take a break, or I don't know, procrastinate more, because the next half is going to be pretty full of information as well. Uh, have you taken a break yet? Okay, I think we're ready now. Dairying. Dairying is a we're moving on to the types of agricultures in more developed countries and developed countries now. So dairying is a type of agriculture that involves milk and milk cows. So dairy is a product of milk or milk itself that and they're traditionally consumed in the farm because they spoil really quickly. And dairy farms are located near urban areas because if you put a dairy farm away from an urban area, once it ships to that urban area, it will spoil. So there's an area around a city called a milk shed, which is an area where milk can be delivered without perishing or without spoiling. And the milk shed has increased exponentially a lot in the recent years because transportation improvements. So in the 1840s, before the train tracks were like produced, before train tracks were put on and working, they could only normally travel 50 miles before the milk spoiled. Now we can travel 500 miles and the milk wouldn't spoil. Today, the farm companies, they normally specialize in milk or cheese and butter, so milk products, not both. They don't specialize in both of them because milk spoils quickly, but milk products don't spoil quickly. They don't want to have to deal with both of them. Another type of agriculture is called mixed crop and livestock. So the mixed crops and livestock works really well because the animal gets the feed from the crops, the animal poops, the poops grow the crop, and then the animal gets the feed from the crop again, and then the cycle continues. So the animal products are normally the ones that are getting sold, not the plants. So they could distribute the workload throughout the year. So the crops could be tended all year round, and the livestock could be tended. No, the livestock could be tended all year round, and the crops could only be tended when they are harvested and when they are planted. So the work is distributed, so we know what to spend more of our time on when doing agriculture in mixed crop and livestock. So the crop rotation there's a crop rotation system with this mixed crop and livestock. Traditionally, there's a 2-field system, and then come a 3-field system, and then comes a 4-field system. So the 2-field system is just a one cereal crop, which is like oats, wheat, rye, and barley, and then one field is just left fallow. Fallow means there's no crop on the land to develop the nutrients. So the 3-field system, people started to know better, and there's 2 more fields. There's 1 more field, and there's 1 more cereal field. So 2 cereal fields, and 1 of them is left fallow. Now the 4-field system. 4-field system is what they use today. So the cereal, there's 1 field that is a cereal crop. There's 1 field that's a cereal crop. There's 1 field that's a rest crop. So the rest crop is normally a crop like clover, and clover is a crop that restores the nutrients in the soil. And then there's another cereal crop, and then there's a root crop. Root crops are like potatoes, carrots, yam, sorghum. I don't remember the type of crops, but they're root crops, and the root crops also restore the nutrients in the soil. Next, we have grain. Grain is also like mixed crop and livestock, but it's not mixed crop and livestock because the grain is being sold, not the livestock. So the wheat is the world's leading export crop, and it's a high value per unit weight, and there's a low cost to transport it. So wheat's a really important crop. But there's 2 types of wheat regions in the U.S. called the winter wheat and the spring wheat. So the winter wheat's in Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and the crop's grown in the fall. It survives the winter, and it's ripe in early summer. However, the spring wheat it's quicker. The crop's grown in the spring because the winter is too harsh and it might destroy the crop. It's harvested in the late summer. So grain crops have increased dramatically because of the new technology, which is the McCormick reaper. I've already told you about that in about the 1830s, which increased the yield by a little bit. To combines right now, which can do multiple jobs like reaping, threshing, and cleaning. So we can increase the yield by a lot. And we have auto planters. We have everything. So the whole process can be mechanized. There's horticulture and truck farming. So at the right you can see a bunch of grapes. So grapes are part of horticulture, Mediterranean farming a lot. Horticulture is the growing of fruits, vegetables, and flowers. So olives, flowers that you use for your Valentine, whatever that is. And the truck farming is farming on a truck, but the truck in Middle English it means bartering. That's just a good fact to know. It's probably not relevant for the AP test. The truck farming it uses machines in every step of the process, and they are willing to experiment with different crops to maximize efficiency in harvesting, planting, and all the means of agriculture. The labor costs are low because truck farming usually involves illegal immigrants from Mexico or guest workers from other countries, so that are willing to work for the low wages. Therefore, truck farming is not that costly. So some people do specialty farming, which is kind of a subdivision of truck farming, which is growing crops with limited but increasing demands. So, for example, mushrooms, peppers, and asparagus. There's not a great demand for them, but if you grow these in a place where people don't know they existed or people don't eat a lot of them, restaurants will suddenly introduce them, and then it'll be introduced, and then there will be a higher demand for them. And in this definition, this is increasing demands as well. So if you don't plant it, if no one plants it and you plant it, you get the money. So Mediterranean is also another type, and this is a terrible picture of a bunch of mangoes. But mangoes are a part of Mediterranean and horticulture. So horticulture is practiced a lot in the Mediterranean climate. Climate is a sea winds, and it has a moderate winters. And the winters are hot, but the breeze from the sea in the Mediterranean Sea counter those hot summers. So even though the horticulture is practiced a lot, the region's also known for cereal crops like rice, wheat, oats, and barley. So olive and grapes are very important cash crops in the Mediterranean agriculture. California, especially, is one of the places where Mediterranean agriculture is practiced, and California products are tree nuts, deciduous fruits, and citrus fruit. They are California is one of the leading exports of these nuts in the United States. So the housing development in California has contributed to loss of farmland. So in California, there's a lot of places where Mediterranean agriculture could have been practiced, but since places like Los Angeles and San Francisco are experiencing an urban sprawl, our Mediterranean agriculture is declining in California, maybe not in other places. So the last form of agriculture is called grazing, the cattle ranching, most like, and it really connects to U.S. popular culture. So cattle ranching started in Spain and Portugal. Then the practice spread to Texas. So we have every before the 1940s, we thought everyone in the United States were cowboys. Literally, that's the perspective of every single lower developed countries, less developing countries, is everyone in the United States were cowboys. But now we obviously know that it's everyone in the United States not cowboys. So USA popular culture is based on grazing. So the Texas farmers would need to sell their crops. They would need to sell their not crops, animal products to Chicago in order to get more money for their products. Because in Texas, everyone's selling cattle, but in Chicago they have mixed crop and livestock there. They don't really. They have mixed crop and livestock, and they have a lot of grain farming. They don't really have that much cattle, so if you sell it to Chicago, you get more money. And they travel through a trail called a Chisholm Trail. Now there used to be a thing called the Code of the South or the Code of the West, where the range where cattle could graze freely everywhere, no matter where the place is, and farmers started getting kind of angry because the cattle were kind of like they trampling over their land and they couldn't farm. So there were battles between ranchers and farmers, and there was wire. No, they built fences, and then the rangers would put their own fences and cut the other guy's fence, and then the farmer would then put barbed wire, and the barbed wire was what ended up being the winning thing for the farmers. So then the U.S. government stepped in, said they can have this land, and the grazers had to buy land or loan land from the U.S. government in order to have their cows graze on a piece of land. The cattle breeds aren't really that important, but there were two cattle breeds. They were Longhorn. They had terrible meat, but they could survive the winter, and they were really tough. And the Hereford, which they had good meat, but they were weaker. So today, cattle ranching isn't really prevalent anymore. They normally stuff pigs like this in this picture into concentrated animal feeding operations, which force feeds animals, and it's kind of inhumane, and force feeds them normally corn to fatten them like a lot in order to produce great meat. So with all of these types of more developed countries farming methods, we have von Thunen. Von Thunen was a guy who created the von Thunen model, which basically places where every single farming kind of way where it should be in relation to the market. And he wrote a thing called the isolated state. So this assumption was based on that the country was an isolated state. Von Thunen model was used to explain the proximity to the market and the choice of crops in the commercial farms. It's basically what I just explained, but more technical. So the first ring is normally horticulture and dairying, and the reason why it's horticulture and dairying is because fruits, vegetables, flowers, and milk spoil really quickly, so they got to be close to the market. Now forestry is normally in the second ring because wood is really heavy. Like if you've ever carried a piece of wood before, it's like a trunk of wood. It's really heavy. So transportation costs are low in places where wood is in places where it's closer to the market. So obviously the closer to the market you are, the lower the transportation cost. Ring 3 is grain and enclosed fields. Now it's grain and enclosed fields because other crops can be transported for not that much money, and we need a lot of land for grain. We want to get that lot of land for cheaper money. We got to go farther away from the market, and I'll discuss the bid rent theory later. And the grain can be transported relatively cheaply because grain doesn't really contain that much weight. And the ring 4, the final ring, is grazing. Now grazing, you need a lot more land than ring 3 for grazing, and there's a 7-ring model here, but ring 4, 5, and 6 is mostly just ring 3. So you need a lot of land for grazing, and the farther away from the market, the cheaper the land is. And bid rent theory is what describes that process. So as we move farther away from the central business district, or the market in this case, the land value decreases. So we have to have the retailing and the kind of tertiary sectors in the in closer to the market. The secondary sectors kind of farther away, and then the primary sectors really far away, which is also called the concentric zone model. But I'm not going to talk about that. The von Thunen model is justified because land is more expensive the farther you get to the closer you get to the market. So we gotta have the things that would sell next to the things that would sell and the things that would spoil quickly near the market in order to have the most effective land use. And yeah, now today agriculture is dominated by a lot of companies, multinational corporations, transnational corporations, a lot of them, and grains are dominated by companies like Kraft and General Mills. So this macaroni and cheese, Kraft is obviously the producer, and meat is dominated by Tyson and Cargill. So all of the chicken nuggets that you eat from McDonald's, that's made by Tyson, and Cargill makes all of these types of foods as well. So all of the pasta and meatballs and stuff, that's all made by Cargill. So all food tastes, the food tastes the same because we want everyone to have that childhood memory. So this is what I pulled directly from a documentary called Food Inc. So we want food to taste the same in every McDonald's in the world. Therefore, there has to be one multinational corporation controlling all food. And the workers are being treated kind of inhumane in these factories that industrialize food now, because we want cheap food. Therefore, we want the workers to experience the least benefits as possible. We want the workers to have the least as possible in order for our consumers to get this cheap food. So the workers aren't being treated well. They're not given health benefits. They're not given good wages. They have to experience pigs screaming in their ears every single day. And livestock fattening is happening a lot as well. So the animals are being fed with corn, as I've said, in order to be fattened, and it's called a feedlot. And we want to make good food. We want to make a lot of meat in order to sell for money, because money is everything now. So we make our livestock fat. Now, something that's been going on lately is people are starting to plant more, people are starting to farm more organic now, which is a little bit more humane, but it's still way out of the ideal farming that we want today. So it's a little bit more humane. Like animals actually get to turn around, and animals actually get to. This is like a best case scenario kind of, and chemicals and genetic modifiers are not used on crops. And industrial farming is not humane at all because of the workers, and they do the same job over and over and over again because the company wants the most efficient out of the workers. So if the workers do the same job, they can become well at that job, and then they can produce more food for the company. So there are challenges in every single thing in AP Human Geography. There are obstacles to them. So for example, we have obstacles to demographics, we have obstacles to migration, we have obstacles to services, we have obstacles to between countries and cultures, and political conflicts, and we also have obstacles in agriculture. So in developed countries, there's too much food. There's too much food, and the Green Revolution is partly to blame for this. We have too much food, so because we have such a high supply, and we have such a load, we have like an increase in demand, but not that much demand. the price has to be really low, and because the price is really low, we're not making enough money. This is the curve I'm actually going to draw on this. So as the price increases, and as the supply increases, the demand decreases, and because the supply increases, this is the price. So let's say if we produce so much food, wait, 3, 7. So if we have so much food, we have to sell our crops for cheaper, and this is kind of dumb because this is supposed to be the 3 and this is supposed to be the 7, but this is how the price works. If we have so much food, we have to make the food cheaper, and if we have so little food, we have to make it more expensive because there's a higher demand, and if we have so much food, we have to make it cheaper. So we're not making enough money, and these revolutions, they keep making us have more food. So the government has stepped in over the recent years. They encourage farmers to grow crops that are not in excess supplies, like mushrooms. I rarely see people have recipes with mushrooms. Normally it's grains and a lot of like carrots and potatoes, but not much mushrooms. I really like mushrooms. That's just a fact. And if they don't get the target price, if the farmers don't get enough money, they pay farmers a target price, and they pay farmers the remainder. So if a farmer is set to make $24,000 a year, but they didn't make $24,000 a year, they only made $17,000. The government will provide the subsidy to make the remaining $7,000, and the government also use those excess crops. They sell it to other LDCs, or they give it to other LDCs, and the excess crops has gone into programs for food stamps for low-income Americans, which is really sweet of them. So, oh god, I have no picture for this. Whatever. Sustainable and organic farming. So, sustainable and organic farming is another kind of solution to the agriculture in MDCs, to problems with agriculture in MDs in developed countries, and they have a process called rich tillage. So rich tillage is a system of planting crops where we have like a line of a whole, like a valley, and then crops, and then a valley, and then crops, and then a valley, and then crops. It's not like a big valley. I kind of need a picture to illustrate this, but it's basically just a valley, and then the crop, and then a valley, and then a crop, and then a valley, and then a crop, and then there's big lines of crops, So this valley allows air and earthworms to get into the soil, increasing the soil's nutrients. And the increase in the soil's nutrients, we don't have to use chemicals, we don't have to use pesticides and fertilizers in order to increase the yield of the crop. So there's a better yield than conventional farming and less cost of production for this way of farming, which is really good. It's a double win. So there's another way to do sustainable organic farming, so it's limiting chemicals, and rich tillage is being used to do this. Now, conventionally, Roundup Ready seeds were used, which were seeds that were like heavily modified, and people don't like this because it changes their soil and water quality, and it causes some weeds to be resistant. Now, their farm has a bunch of weeds. No one wants weeds. Weeds destroy your farm. If you're ever a farmer, weeds destroy your farms. It's not good. And there's another problem in MDCs. It's integrating crops and livestock. So sustainable agriculture is sensitive to the complexity of the biological and economic interdependency between crop and livestock. So in order to sustainably do crops and livestock, it's really hard. And why? Because the farmer has to know the correct distribution for the areas of livestock and crops. if they don't, then the crops might trample over the livestock might trample over the crops, or there's not enough grazing for the livestock to do. Therefore, they might die. There's not enough crops to feed the livestock. Therefore, they might die. Another problem is people think that animal confinement is not ethical, and it really isn't. So animals are confined into a pen, and the conditions in the pen are harsh. They're disgusting. Poop literally drops into the ground, and they have to smell that poop. Like, people have to go in with gas masks in order to not get like a severe nose injury. So animal confinement's not that ethical. And that's a problem with integrating crop and livestock today. So CAFO, and concentrated feeding, and a lot of this, basically. So the management of animals in extreme weather conditions. If we have an extreme weather condition, our crops won't grow accurately, and if our crops don't grow good, then our animals don't get the feed. And sometimes we have to kill these animals before they're even born because we don't have enough crops to feed all of them, which is definitely not humane. And then we get worse quality meat. Those are some problems with integrating crop and livestock. Okay, now we move to developing countries. Malthus, we're going to go back to Malthus, which is the guy who thought that the world was going to end because of overpopulation. There's one possible way to fix this overpopulation, the population growth geometrically. It's called the Esther-Bogerup thesis. Esther Bogerup is a guy, I really respect him for making his thesis. So basically there's this five-step kind of way that a subsistence farm will run as the population increases. So first is basically shifting cultivation. So a piece of land is planted for 2 years and then left for 20 years. Then we have kind of lighter shifting cultivation. Planted for 8 years, left for 10 years. Then planted for 2 years, left for 2 years. Then we have a rotation of root crops and cereal crops. And then finally we use all of the field. We use the whole field, different types of crops, and efficient crop rotation. So and by doing this, we also adopt new ways of farming in order to increase the yield of the farm per land area, hence the intensive subsistence agriculture. So this is kind of the cycle. This is kind of the cycle that less developed farmers go by. There's a growing demand for food in countries, in lower developed countries. Therefore, they must improve the farming in their country, and they need money to do that. So they start producing crops for exports, like drug crops, which I'll introduce later, cash crops. And there's a problem with that because now the farmers who used to produce food for themselves are now producing for others. So they don't produce for themselves anymore, because they want the money and they want to improve their own ways to produce for themselves, but they actually end up producing for the others. It's kind of a loop. It's kind of a loop back into here. So they will never. They will probably never come back to fix for people for the growing demand for food. So I put an arrow here because I don't know what's gonna happen next because people don't know. So drug crops are one of the crops that people export, and drug crops are marijuana, heroin, and cocaine. And these countries are the producers of drug crops. Now, a golden triangle of Southeast Asia is like Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos, and Myanmar. And the golden crescent of Southwest Asia is like I think the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, and Pakistan, or something like that. And drugs are an easy way to make money because people get addicted all the time. Because people get addicted all the time, you can just keep selling more and make more money. And when people fall in depression, they also take drugs. And because they're taking drugs, we can make more of them to make more money. And there's another problem. It's called desertification, urbanization. So this kind of also goes into MDCs. So in semi-arid regions like, I don't know, Africa, the Sahel in Africa, or the west coast of California, the west coast of the United States, or in the Middle East, farmlands are getting abandoned because of overgrazing or deforestation, or they utilize the land, so the soil quality decreases. Excessive water can also wash away the nutrients, and the nutrients are washed away. The soil quality is pretty much unusable. And urban sprawl is also a factor. Urban sprawl is also a factor in losing farmland. So areas like Los Angeles have great Mediterranean farmland, but it's gone now. All of the land is gone because Los Angeles is now an urban area, especially the land that's gone is prime agricultural land, which is land that is the best for growing crops. And 20% of that land is gone now because of urban sprawl, because people want to turn it into urban areas. So there are some strategies to increase the food supply in LDCs. We could use the oceans. The oceans can be cultivated. They can be cultivated. We can use the water just in general. So there's aquaculture, which is the farming of fish and marine animals to consume and export. For example, oyster farming is happening a lot. Sturgeon farming is happening a lot. There's farmed salmon now, which is great because I want to eat my salmon. And there's aquaponics, which is it allows cultivation of plants in water. So now plants can be grown in the water. That's great. My old science teacher used to have a aquaponic system where lettuce could be just cut and then eaten. So overfishing has been a problem in the world, however, because for example, sturgeon caviar is close to extinction, and sharks are fished only for their fins, and that's it. And because sharks are only fished for their fins, the rest of their body goes to waste, even though they could technically be eaten if prepared under right circumstances, and they actually provide quite good nutrients. Sharks are pretty much only fished for their fins, and people have kind of conserved these species of fish now. They conserve it by the law of the sea because there's an extensive economic zone around each country of 200 miles, and they can do whatever they want with the 200 miles that they have. And the 200 miles that they have, they can protect some species that are close to extinction. Now this is kind of an obvious solution, but since more developed countries have a food surplus problem, and the less developed countries are not having enough food due to increasing population, what should we do? Yeah, we should get the food from the more developed country export to the less developed countries. So we have a level amount of food. So in the this happens a lot, but it's not happening enough. So in the United States, we grow this, we export this. We export 1/3 of the world's grains, 1/2 of the world's maize, 1/4 of the world's wheat. Thailand also exports a lot, and Japan and China are the two countries. They import a lot of grain from other countries because even though they can grow grain, they rather import them. And another way that we can increase the food yield is we can actually take the GMO movement. So the GMO movement is the fourth agricultural revolution. We can take the fourth agricultural revolution and produce more food for everyone. So food throughout the whole year and good for everyone. No one has to starve. And the Esther Bothrop thesis also helps. We increase global productivity, more machines in lower developed countries, and then we can increase our food yield. Intensive subsistence agriculture, we can use the machines for that. It's in order to make it like grain farming in the more developed countries. The problem is lower developed countries or developing countries don't have enough money in order to fuel for these projects, these machine projects. Okay, into the present day now. So there are new ways to produce food today. There are new fertilizers. There are drones. Drones are literally like controlling pretty much everything. We can get footage from drones from the North Sentinel Island, like showed you like an hour ago. Drones can be used to pour water. Drones can be used as part of robots. We can use robots to mechanize, automate everything. We can grow food in buildings, which is vertical farming. So like farming in kind of steps. We can grow our foods in building. We can take advantage of the humidity level, and we can take advantage of the conditioning and the air quality in buildings to grow food. We can clone animals and make lab-grown meat today, which is a project going on. I think lab-grown meat's already kind of sold for a reasonable price, and we can make more genetically modified seeds, like I've said, in order to give more food to people. Like I said at the beginning of the chapter, main goal of agriculture is to produce enough food for everyone to survive and live another day, another week, another lifetime. And that's the main goal of the world, and the most basic part of the world, the most basic goal of all of humanity. So we're done. You're done with the agricultural unit. I'm done talking. That was a lot of talking, but I'm done with all of it. So, and you're done with all the review. So you should. Great job for listening to this whole presentation. If you have listened to this whole presentation, great job. If you haven't, then I'll include timestamps down below, mate. I'm not sure about that, but I might include timestamps down below for each section, probably after the agricultural test that I'm going to be taking in about 2 days though. Otherwise, great job for reviewing all of the stuff that you need for agriculture in AP Human Geography, and until next time,